Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Death Eaters have always seemed like Voldemort's soulless puppet, shadows of his will executing his darkest commands. But what if things were far more complicated? What if behind those cold masks there was their own code, secret rituals, hidden levels of initiation, and even traitors? Today we'll follow the trail of the most dangerous wizards of the wizarding world to uncover how they built their network, how their hierarchy functioned, and why some of them never ended up in Azkaban. Enjoy the video. Number 1. How does the Dark Mark work? The most recognizable symbol of the Death Eaters was the Dark Mark, a skull with a snake tattooed on the left forearm. It wasn't just a mark of loyalty. In the Goblet of Fire, we see Voldemort summon his followers by touching Bellatrix's mark. Instantly, the others begin to burn, the signal to gather. But the mark also worked both ways. The Death Eaters could use it to summon their master. Karkaroff, a former Death Eater, noticed his mark growing darker as Voldemort regained strength. This suggests that the Dark Mark wasn't just a magical signal, but a symbol of life connection between the Dark Lord and his servants. The stronger Voldemort became, the more the mark burned on his warrior's skin. Number 2. Why did certain characters receive the Dark Mark? 3 characters raise the most questions: Severus Snape, Peter Pettigrew, and Draco Malfoy. Snape's case is clear. He had long been a member of the organization. But Pettigrew's, and especially Draco's, marks are strange. For Draco, a teenager, joining the Death Eaters seemed more like a desperate attempt to preserve his family's honor. But the mark was not merely a brand. It was likely a safeguard against betrayal. Its bearer could never fully hide their allegiance, making double agency nearly impossible. And here lies Voldemort's cruel genius. Even if his followers wanted to switch sides, the darkness burned into their skin would never let them truly escape. Number 3. Did the Death Eaters have a hierarchy? Despite the chaos, the Death Eaters had a structure. At the top, Voldemort himself. Below him, the inner circle, Bellatrix Lestrange, Lucius Malfoy, occasionally Nagini and others who were entrusted with Horcruxes and the Dark Lord's greatest secrets. Then came the active Death Eaters, those who fought and carried out missions. Below them, those who bore the mark but stayed behind the scenes. And at the bottom, sympathizers and helpers, officials, merchants, and wizards who served Voldemort without officially joining the Order. Thus was formed an army where fear and loyalty were woven into a dangerous pattern of power. Number 4. How were the Death Eaters originally formed? The origins of the movement trace back to Hogwarts itself. It was there that young Tom Riddle began gathering those who shared his obsession with blood purity. Dumbledore told Harry in The Half-Blood Prince that Voldemort created his first circle of followers during his school years. After graduation, they brought in their siblings, cousins, and even their own children. This was especially common in Slytherin, where bloodline pride passed from generation to generation, turning impressionable students into devoted followers of Tom Riddle. Thus the Death Eaters became not merely an organization, they became a legacy. Number 5. At what age could one become a Death Eater? History shows that the path to the Dark Lord could begin early. Draco Malfoy received his mark between his 5th and 6th years. Regulus Black died around 18, meaning he'd served for several years. Barty Crouch Jr. was imprisoned at about 19. These facts suggest the minimum age for initiation was around 15 to 16. From youth, they were raised in a culture of superiority and fear. For Voldemort, it was the perfect age. Passion without reason. Number 6. How did so many avoid Azkaban? After Voldemort's first fall, the Order of the Phoenix counted several dozen fighters. The Death Eaters, however, numbered in the hundreds, yet only a handful went to Azkaban. Why? Some, like Lucius Malfoy, claimed they'd been under the Imperious Curse. Others, like Igor Karkaroff, betrayed their comrades for freedom. Severus Snape escaped punishment thanks to Dumbledore's personal guarantee, but the main reason was money. The wealthiest Death Eaters had enough gold to bribe officials, falsify records, and buy themselves a reputation as victims of circumstance. Number 7. What was Peter Pettigrew's status? You'd think Pettigrew would earn respect. He helped destroy the Potters, tortured the Longbottoms, found Voldemort, and helped restore his body. Yet even then the Death Eaters despised him. Wormtail was never trusted. He was useful, but never respected. After the Goblet of Fire, he received no important missions. Yes, he had a silver hand and the Dark Mark, but his place in the hierarchy was barely above 0. Pettigrew wasn't a devoted warrior, but a coward seeking protection. And Voldemort knew it well. Number 8. How many Death Eaters did Harry meet before the Goblet of Fire? Fun fact, Harry met several Death Eaters long before he even knew they existed. In the Sorcerer's Stone, Quirrell and Snape. In the Chamber of Secrets, Lucius Malfoy. In the Prisoner of Azkaban, Pettigrew and McNair, the Ministry executioner. Only later did he realize all these figures were threads in the same dark web woven by Voldemort long before his return. Number 9. What happens to a Death Eater's family if they fail? Failure under Voldemort was never just personal. It was a sentence for the entire family. The Malfoys learned this lesson better than anyone. After Lucius failed to retrieve the prophecy in the Order of the Phoenix, Voldemort's wrath fell upon his whole household. Their mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, became a gilded cage. In the Deathly Hallows, Narcissa and Draco moved through its halls in silence, watched by Death Eaters who treated them like prisoners. Bellatrix mocked Lucius openly, sneering, "You lost everything, didn't you, cousin?" He bowed his head, a broken man in his own home. For Voldemort, families were tools, and punishment was part of loyalty. When a follower failed, their loved ones became hostages. It was how he ruled, through fear that reached beyond the battlefield and into the heart. Narcissa's quiet desperation during the Battle of Hogwarts showed the cost of that tyranny. When she lied to Voldemort, claiming Harry was dead, it wasn't courage. It was a mother's rebellion against a master who would sacrifice even her child. The Malfoys survived, but they were no longer servants of power. They were survivors of it. Number 10. Were there women among the Death Eaters? Women were rare among the Death Eaters, but the few who bore the Dark Mark left a trail of terror that even their male counterparts respected. Bellatrix Lestrange stood above them all, wild, loyal, and utterly devoted. Her laugh could chill blood. In the Order of the Phoenix, she taunted Sirius before killing him, shouting, "Only I can kill you." Her magic was ruthless, her devotion absolute. She wasn't following Voldemort for power or wealth. She worshipped him. Every duel, every scream, every act of cruelty was her declaration of love to the Dark Lord. Others followed her path of fanaticism. Alecto Caro and her brother Amicus became the face of Voldemort's new regime inside Hogwarts. When the school fell under his control, Alecto served as deputy headmistress, teaching Muggle studies twisted into propaganda and cruelty. She punished children for compassion, rewarded them for hate. In the Deathly Hallows, Professor McGonagall stunned her without hesitation, a moment that showed the end of Voldemort's reign and the fall of his corrupted order. These women proved that darkness knew no gender. When they served Voldemort, mercy ceased to exist. Number 11. What was the initiation ritual to become a Death Eater? The initiation into the ranks of the Death Eaters was a ritual shrouded in darkness and fear. Though J.K. Rowling never described it in detail, fragments from the books reveal enough to imagine it. The ceremony always began with the marking, the burning of the dark mark into the left forearm. It wasn't just a tattoo, it was a bond. In the Goblet of Fire, Voldemort pressed his wand to Wormtail's arm, and the mark burned blacker than ink. It was a sign of both power and ownership. From that moment, the recruit's life no longer belonged to him. Voldemort himself often attended these ceremonies, watching the trembling figures kneel before him. His gaze was enough to paralyze even the strongest. "You are my chosen," he would whisper, the words both blessing and curse. For him, the ritual wasn't merely about recruitment, it was about domination. He needed to see fear to feel control. Many, like Draco Malfoy, were forced into this act out of terror and family duty. Others, like Bellatrix Lestrange, took the mark willingly, their eyes shining with fanatical devotion. The final part of initiation was the test, proof of loyalty through blood or crime. Some were ordered to torture, others to kill. The act itself bound them forever to the Dark Lord. There was no turning back. Once a Death Eater, always a Death Eater. The ceremony didn't just create followers, it erased identities. When the screams faded and Voldemort's mark seared into flesh, the person who had entered the circle ceased to exist. Only the servant remained. Number 12. Were there spies or double agents among the Death Eaters? Spies walked among the Death Eaters, hiding in plain sight. The most famous was Severus Snape, the man who fooled both sides and paid the price for it. To Voldemort, he was the perfect servant. To Dumbledore, the most valuable spy. Every move he made was a gamble. When Bellatrix questioned his loyalty, Snape replied coldly, "You ask for the Dark Lord's secrets, yet you do not trust his judgment?" That silence that followed was deadly. Only Snape could speak to her like that and live. His double game shaped the war, feeding Voldemort lies, guiding Harry from the shadows, and dying with the truth still locked inside him. But Snape wasn't alone. Igor Karkaroff also betrayed the Dark Lord, though not out of bravery. After Voldemort's first fall, Karkaroff stood before the Wizengamot and gave up the names of his comrades. "I have names," he cried, in the Goblet of Fire. "I can give you names." It saved him from Azkaban, but not from vengeance. When Voldemort returned, Karkaroff fled, terrified. His body was found months later, marked and lifeless. For a Death Eater, mercy was never permanent. These betrayals poisoned the very heart of Voldemort's army. Paranoia spread like fire. No one trusted anyone, and even loyalty became a mask. Voldemort tested his followers, set traps, and watched who hesitated. The fear of spies made them ruthless, and that fear, more than any spell, began to destroy them from within. In the end, the Dark Lord fell not only because of those who fought him, but because of those who once served him and dared to lie. Number 13. Why didn't some pure-blood families join the Death Eaters? Not every pure-blood family answered Voldemort's call. Some refused to stain their name with his madness. The Weasleys stood as the brightest example of defiance. Though their lineage was as old as the Malfoys, their values were different. Arthur Weasley believed in equality between all magical beings, even Muggles. When others mocked him as a blood traitor, he only smiled. In the Chamber of Secrets, Draco Malfoy sneered, You'll soon find out that some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. But the Weasleys had already chosen their side. The right one? Their rejection of Voldemort's ideology wasn't just political, it was moral. Molly and Arthur raised their children to respect kindness over power, courage over purity. They paid dearly for it. The family was ridiculed for their poverty, targeted by Death Eaters, and forced to live under constant threat. But their loyalty to Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix never wavered. In the Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort took control of the Ministry, the burrow became a refuge for the hunted. The Weasleys' defiance turned their humble home into a fortress of light against the spreading darkness. Other pureblood families made the same choice, quietly, carefully, and at great risk. The Longbottoms and the Prewetts, for instance, fought bravely for the Order. Frank and Alice Longbottom were tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange herself. Their suffering was a message. Defying the Dark Lord meant eternal punishment. Yet their silence under the Cruciatus curse became a symbol of strength, proof that not every pure blood could be bought or broken. Voldemort wanted unity among the pure, but his cruelty divided them instead. Those who joined him traded honor for fear. Those who resisted paid with pain. The Weasleys, mocked as blood traitors, became heroes of a new kind, a family that proved that true nobility has nothing to do with blood. In the end, their courage outshone every ancient name that had bowed before the Dark Lord. Number 14. Were there rules even Death Eaters couldn't break? Even in a world built on cruelty, the Death Eaters lived by unspoken laws. Voldemort demanded absolute loyalty, not obedience out of fear, but surrender of the soul. To question him was to die. When Lucius Malfoy failed during the events at the Ministry, Voldemort didn't need to raise his wand. A single glance was enough to strip him of dignity and power. In the Deathly Hallows, when Lucius dared to ask about Draco's safety, Voldemort cut him down with words sharper than any curse. "You dare speak to me." For a Death Eater, even a moment of hesitation meant ruin. The second taboo was the Horcruxes. Their existence was sacred and forbidden to discuss. Only a few, Bellatrix Lestrange, Severus Snape, and perhaps Nagini herself, knew fragments of the truth. When Voldemort spoke of them, his voice dropped to a whisper, his eyes glowing with something darker than rage. Even his most trusted followers feared the subject. Bellatrix once cried, "My lord, I swear I never knew," when he accused her of carelessness. To even guess at the nature of his immortality was to challenge his godhood, and no one challenged the Dark Lord. The final and most unforgivable sin was betrayal. No Death Eater could leave the circle alive. Igor Karkaroff tried and paid the price. After he fled abroad and betrayed his comrades to the Ministry, Voldemort marked him for death. In the Half-Blood Prince, we learn his body was found frozen, the dark mark carved above him. There was no forgiveness for deserters. Voldemort's reach extended beyond life and distance. It found those who ran, no matter how far. These laws weren't written, but they ruled with the power of blood. The Death Eaters followed them not out of honor, but out of terror. Every meeting, every mission carried the shadow of death for those who disobeyed. The Dark Lord did not need laws carved in stone. His followers were the scripture, their fear the ink. In that silence of obedience, the true order of the Death Eaters was born, an empire of fear, where even the faithful trembled. Number 15. Who was the most loyal Death Eater? Among all of Voldemort's followers, one name shines with terrifying devotion: Bellatrix Lestrange. Her loyalty was not simply obedience, It was worship. While others feared the Dark Lord, Bellatrix adored him. She saw in him not a man, but a god. When the world turned against Voldemort after his first fall, she did not run or hide. She went to Azkaban smiling, proud to have served him. As she shouted during her trial in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, "The Dark Lord will rise again, and we shall be rewarded." Even chained and condemned, her faith never wavered. In the icy silence of Azkaban, surrounded by Dementors, Bellatrix's devotion did not die. Most prisoners broke within months, but she endured for nearly 15 years. She survived on madness and memory, the memory of Voldemort's power. When he finally returned, her joy was almost divine. She fell to her knees before him, whispering, "Master, at last." That moment revealed the truth. Azkaban had not punished her. It had purified her faith. Her loyalty was so fierce that it bordered on obsession. She killed without hesitation. Sirius Black, her own cousin, fell by her wand as she laughed. She duelled Hermione Granger with a sadistic delight, screaming that no one could rival her in serving the Dark Lord. Voldemort trusted her with secrets others would never hear. She guarded Nagini, helped in the torture of the Longbottoms, and carried out his will with an almost holy fervour. Yet her devotion was also her doom. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Bellatrix fought as if Voldemort himself watched her every move. She laughed as curses flashed around her, fearless, ecstatic, but her faith met its end at the hands of Molly Weasley. "Not my daughter, you bitch!" Molly roared, and the spell struck true. Bellatrix fell, still smiling. She died exactly as she had lived, consumed by her love for the Dark Lord. Number 16. Did any Death Eaters regret their actions? Regulus Arcturus Black was not born to be a hero. He was born into the noble and ancient House of Black, a family that wore the banner of pure blood superiority like armor and spoke the name of the Dark Lord with reverence. From the moment he could understand words, Regulus was surrounded by the whispers of loyalty to Voldemort. His parents, proud and strict, saw in their younger son the continuation of their legacy. Unlike his rebellious brother Sirius, who defied everything the family stood for, Regulus absorbed their values with the quiet obedience of a child desperate to be loved. He believed that by serving Lord Voldemort he was protecting the purity of wizard kind. He was young, impressionable, and blinded by the illusion of honor. The world of the Death Eaters was seductive to someone like him. It promised belonging, strength, and purpose, all wrapped in the darkness of power. The mark on the forearm, the whispered missions, the sense of being part of something greater. It filled the void left by a lifetime of family expectation. When he first received the dark mark, Regulus must have felt proud. To him, it was not yet a symbol of cruelty or death, but a badge of destiny. In those early years, Voldemort's followers believed themselves chosen, crusaders for a new order. The truth, however, was far darker than Regulus could have ever imagined. In the shadows of Voldemort's reign, even loyalty was twisted. The Dark Lord trusted no one, cared for no one, and demanded everything. Regulus began to see this truth not through great acts of rebellion, but through small cracks in his faith. One of those moments came when Kreacher, the Black family's loyal house elf, was summoned by Voldemort himself. Regulus was proud that his family's servant was chosen for the Dark Lord's work, until the elf returned broken and terrified. Kreacher spoke of a cave by the sea, of a potion that burned his throat, and of inferi that stirred beneath the black water. Voldemort had used him as a test subject, and he had left him there to die. Only Kreacher's bond to his master had brought him home. That night, Regulus's world began to crumble. For the first time, he understood that the Dark Lord's cruelty knew no limits, not even toward those who served him. Voldemort had not seen Kreacher as a being worthy of mercy, only as a tool to be discarded. For a young man raised to value loyalty, the betrayal struck deep. The realization that he was serving a master who devoured his own followers was unbearable. "Do not call me coward," Severus Snape would one day say in defense of his own regret, but Regulus never had the chance to defend his name. His decision to turn against Voldemort was made in silence, hidden even from his family. Regulus was clever. He pieced together the meaning behind Kreacher's experience. Voldemort was hiding something so important that he would murder and torture even the innocent to protect it. Regulus did not know the full nature of the Horcruxes, but he understood that this object, the locket bearing the serpentine S, was bound to the Dark Lord's immortality. If destroying it could weaken Voldemort, then stealing it was an act of redemption. The same loyalty that had once driven him to serve now compelled him to betray. "You must do as I command, Kreacher," he said, not in anger, but in sorrow. His plan was suicide dressed as courage. The cave was a place of nightmares. The green potion that guarded the locket burned with the poison of Voldemort's soul. Regulus forced Kreacher to make a vow, to obey and to survive, no matter what happened. He drank the potion himself, his body convulsing as the illusion of despair consumed him. When the Inferi began to rise from the black water, he did not fight. He pressed the locket into Kreacher's hands and whispered his final order, to go home and destroy it. Kreacher obeyed, but the locket was indestructible by his means. Regulus never returned. His name was carved quietly onto the family tapestry, a star extinguished without honor or memory. For years the world knew nothing of his sacrifice. Even Sirius, who despised his brother for joining the Death Eaters, could not imagine the truth. He was a better man than I ever knew, Harry would later think upon learning what Regulus had done. The stolen locket passed from hand to hand, becoming a symbol of the hidden resistance that lived even within Voldemort's ranks. It was Regulus's act of rebellion that eventually allowed Harry, Ron, and Hermione to complete their quest. Without his moment of regret, the war might never have been won. Regret among Death Eaters was rare, but not impossible. Severus Snape, another who bore the mark, shared that same painful understanding. Like Regulus, Snape had entered Voldemort's service believing in power and purpose. He thought the Dark Lord would bring order to the chaos of the world until his love for Lily Potter shattered that illusion. Snape's remorse took a different form, rooted not in ideology, but in personal loss. "After all this time?" Dumbledore asked him, and Snape replied with a single word, "Always." In those two syllables lay the truth that redemption often grows from the soil of regret. Both men, Regulus and Severus, show that the line between darkness and light is not always clear. They were not born monsters. They were young, misled, and caught in a storm larger than themselves. What separates them from those like Bellatrix Lestrange or Fenrir Greyback is that they could still feel. Regulus felt compassion for his elf. Snape felt love for a woman he could never have. The Death Eaters who never regretted their actions were hollow, their humanity consumed by ideology. Those who did regret became tragic figures destroyed by the very cause they once served. Number 17. Could Death Eaters produce a Patronus? When we think about the Patronus charm, we imagine something radiant, a silvery guardian born from pure light, fueled by the happiest memories a wizard can summon. It is, without question, one of the most luminous pieces of magic in the world of Harry Potter. But what happens when we place this charm, this essence of goodness, in the shadowed hands of Voldemort's followers? Could a Death Eater, a servant of darkness and fear, conjure a Patronus? This question touches something deeper than the mechanics of magic. It cuts into the nature of the human soul and the fine line that separates love from loyalty, fear from faith. To understand this paradox, one must recall that the Patronus is not merely a spell, it is a reflection of one's truest self, a shield that thrives only when the heart is clear of hatred. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Professor Lupin once explained that the Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. These words carry a quiet power. They imply that to summon such magic, a witch or wizard must reach within and find a spark untouched by corruption. For the Death Eaters, that spark was almost always extinguished long ago. Imagine Bellatrix Lestrange standing in a cold, empty room, her wand raised, attempting to summon light from within. Her laughter, cruel and sharp, would shatter the stillness, but no silvery creature would appear. Her joy was born from pain, her thrill from destruction. To her, happiness meant power, not love, not peace. And therein lies the reason she could never have conjured a Patronus. The spell does not respond to false joy or twisted delight. It recognizes only the purity of feeling, and Bellatrix's heart, long lost to madness and devotion to Voldemort, held none of it. Rowling herself once remarked that it was extremely unlikely that any Death Eater could produce a full corporeal Patronus. Their souls were scarred, their thoughts consumed by fear and cruelty. Even Lucius Malfoy, who at times seemed to waver between arrogance and cowardice, lacked the inner warmth the spell demands. His happiness came from status and wealth, fleeting illusions of light that fade under the weight of true darkness. For Lucius, a Patronus would have been impossible, for there was no sincere memory strong enough to repel despair. And yet, there is one exception that tears through this rule: Severus Snape. In the depths of his broken heart, where love and guilt intertwined, lived a memory so powerful that it defied the logic of light and dark. His Patronus, a silver doe, was not born from joy but from love, a love so enduring that it outlasted shame, hatred, and the weight of years spent serving Voldemort. It was not a happy memory that summoned Snape's Patronus, but an unending ache for Lily Potter. The light that emerged from his wand was not the light of happiness, but of devotion. This detail transforms everything we know about the Patronus charm. When Harry first saw the silver doe in the Deathly Hallows, it guided him through the frozen forest, leading him to the sword of Gryffindor. He did not yet know whose Patronus it was, nor did he understand the depth of emotion that created it. Only later, in Snape's final memories, does the truth unfold, the moment when Dumbledore, his voice hushed, asked, "After all this time?" And Snape answered, "Always." It is a single word that carries the weight of 2 decades of unspoken love. Snape's ability to conjure a Patronus challenges the very boundaries of moral division. It proves that light and darkness coexist within the same soul. Though he bore the mark of a Death Eater, Snape's heart belonged elsewhere. He lived in a constant duality, a servant of the dark who worked tirelessly for the light. His Patronus was the echo of that contradiction, a silent confession of everything he could never say. If we look closer, even Dumbledore recognized this paradox. He once told Harry that it is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. Snape's choice to stand against Voldemort, though born from grief, reconnected him with the sliver of humanity he had not lost. The Patronus, in its shimmering form, became the symbol of that redemption, proof that love, even when corrupted by pain, could still create light. No other Death Eater shared such a bond with love. Many of them were incapable of it altogether. Take, for instance, Barty Crouch Jr., who lived only for his master's praise. His loyalty was not born of affection, but obsession. His mind was fractured by fear and ambition, leaving no room for tenderness. If he had ever attempted a Patronus, it would have vanished before taking form, as though the light itself recoiled from his spirit. Even those who appeared more complex, like Regulus Black, found themselves caught in this emotional conflict. Though Regulus ultimately turned away from Voldemort, his redemption came too late for the spell to matter. His sacrifice, brave as it was not accompanied by the peace or warmth needed for a Patronus. It was an act of atonement, not of happiness. And perhaps, if he had survived long enough to truly make peace with his soul, a Patronus might have come to him then. Number 18. Why didn't Voldemort forgive failure? When the dark mark blazed across the night sky, those who followed Lord Voldemort knew what it meant: obedience without question, loyalty without hesitation, and punishment without mercy. The Dark Lord ruled not through devotion, but through terror, and the slightest misstep could mean agony or death. Voldemort's intolerance of mistakes was not merely the cruelty of a tyrant, it was the calculated strategy of a man who believed fear was stronger than love. His Death Eaters were bound to him not by admiration, but by the invisible chain of dread that linked every beating heart to his wand. For Voldemort, mistakes were more than personal insults. They were signs of weakness that threatened the illusion of his invincibility. He built his power on the myth of perfection, of being the untouchable, all-knowing master. Any failure from his followers was a crack in that facade, a reminder that even the Dark Lord could be defied or disappointed. To ensure that no such thought lingered, he responded to every error with extreme cruelty. The world of Voldemort had no room for second chances. Crucio was his answer to hesitation, silence and cold contempt were his reply to excuses. Those who displeased him learned quickly that mercy was a concept foreign to their master. Bellatrix Lestrange, one of his most devoted followers, understood this better than anyone. Her loyalty bordered on worship, yet even she trembled at the thought of failure. During the battle in the Department of Mysteries, she saw what Voldemort did to those who disappointed him. After Lucius Malfoy failed to retrieve the prophecy intact, Voldemort's rage was legendary. The proud aristocrat, once among the Dark Lord's favoured, found himself humiliated and discarded. His home became a prison, his family pawns in the Dark Lord's cruel game. Narcissa Malfoy's desperate visit to Severus Snape in The Half-Blood Prince showed the cost of that failure. "The Dark Lord is very angry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Lucius is in disgrace." The punishment of Lucius Malfoy revealed Voldemort's psychology more than any speech could. He did not simply remove followers who failed him, he broke them publicly to ensure others would learn. Humiliation was as powerful as death, perhaps even more so. The fear of sharing Lucius's fate kept others vigilant, paranoid, and obedient. In Voldemort's logic, leadership required domination, and domination was maintained through constant proof of his superiority. Even his closest inner circle understood that affection or forgiveness had no place in his world. Fear was his chosen instrument, and pain was the melody he played to keep the orchestra in tune. The Dark Lord's intolerance for mistakes stemmed from his own insecurity. Tom Riddle, the orphan who became Voldemort, grew up believing that vulnerability invited rejection. Every failure he experienced as a child carved deeper the conviction that only perfection ensured survival. When Dumbledore later said that Voldemort was incapable of love, he meant that the Dark Lord's entire emotional landscape was built on fear of being ordinary, of being powerless, of being forgotten. To forgive a mistake would have meant admitting that imperfection could exist within his own circle and therefore within himself. That was intolerable to a man who saw himself as the ultimate embodiment of control. This fear-driven leadership was effective for a time. The Death Eaters operated like shadows, precise and ruthless. Yet beneath the mask of discipline festered resentment and doubt. When fear becomes the only motivation, loyalty rots from within. Many of Voldemort's followers began to serve him out of survival, not belief. Even Severus Snape, one of his most valuable assets, learned to conceal his true allegiance behind a mask of obedience. In the Goblet of Fire, when Voldemort returned and spoke to his gathered followers, he singled out those who had fled or failed to seek him. "I punish and reward according to their deserts," he said, his eyes cold. "One who has left me will be killed." Those words set the tone for his second reign, rule through terror and loyalty through coercion. The clearest example of Voldemort's unforgiving nature came during the events of the Deathly Hallows when he discovered that the locket Horcrux had been stolen. His wrath was immediate. Without hesitation, he blamed his Death Eaters for incompetence. The air around him became suffocating with fury. He killed without discrimination, his paranoia eroding any sense of strategy. The Dark Lord, who once prided himself on intellect, became enslaved to his own anger. His inability to tolerate mistakes blinded him to the crumbling loyalty around him. Fear no longer inspired efficiency, it inspired sabotage. Consider the case of Regulus Black. Initially a proud Death Eater, Regulus saw the truth behind Voldemort's cruelty. When the Dark Lord used Creature, the house elf, to test the protections of the locket Horcrux, he condemned the creature to a slow, torturous death. That act opened Regulus's eyes. The young wizard realized that loyalty to Voldemort meant nothing, that even the most faithful servant was disposable. Regulus's decision to defy Voldemort and steal the Horcrux was born from that realization. In the end, Voldemort's terror had produced not loyalty, but rebellion. The pattern repeated itself with others. Peter Pettigrew, once trembling with devotion, met his end strangled by his own silver hand. Voldemort's final gift turned against him. The enchanted hand was meant to ensure loyalty, yet it became an executioner when Pettigrew hesitated to kill Harry Potter. Voldemort had crafted his followers' punishment so perfectly that even their own bodies could turn into instruments of death. In that moment, Voldemort's philosophy of absolute control destroyed one more servant. Pettigrew's death was the purest manifestation of Voldemort's creed. Hesitation equals death. Number 19. What happened to the Death Eaters after Voldemort's fall? After the fall of Lord Voldemort, silence spread through the corridors of Hogwarts like a living thing. The dark mark, which had for years been a symbol of fear and loyalty to the Dark Lord, began to fade from the forearms of his followers, leaving behind a faint, ghostly scar. The Death Eaters, the chosen few who once knelt before him, found themselves stripped of purpose, allies, and protection. For years they had believed themselves part of something eternal, but the Battle of Hogwarts shattered that illusion forever. What happened to those who survived that night became one of the most whispered questions in the wizarding world, a tale of shattered loyalties, secret bargains, and the long shadow of guilt. Lucius Malfoy was among the first to fall from grace. Once proud, elegant, and feared, he was reduced to a trembling man during Voldemort's final days, no longer master of his own house. After the battle, when the Ministry of Magic began its investigations, the Malfoys became the center of both suspicion and reluctant sympathy. Narcissa's decision to lie to Voldemort about Harry's death, an act of quiet rebellion, saved her family. Her lie allowed the living to survive, and in the eyes of the new ministry, that counted for something. The Malfoys avoided Azkaban, but they paid another kind of price. Their name became tainted, their fortune diminished, and the doors of polite wizarding society closed to them. Draco returned to Malfoy Manor, haunted by the memory of the Dark Lord sitting in his family's dining room, his voice cold and inhuman. Years later, even his son would sense the unspoken weight of that legacy. Others were not so fortunate. Bellatrix Lestrange, the most fanatical of all Death Eaters, perished during the battle, slain by Molly Weasley in an act that became legendary. Her death marked the symbolic collapse of Voldemort's inner circle. Many of her comrades followed her into the grave that night. Antonin Dolohov, Rodolphus Lestrange, and Thorfinn Raoul among them. But those who fled the scene faced a world that no longer tolerated their existence. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who became Minister for Magic, declared a relentless campaign against any surviving Death Eaters. The time of fear is over, he told the wizarding press. But justice must not sleep. His words echoed through the rebuilt ministry, whose new auras, including Harry Potter himself, began the task of hunting down the remnants of Voldemort's army. Not all who bore the dark mark remained loyal after his death. Some had already turned against him in their hearts long before that final night. Severus Snape's double life was revealed in full after the battle, transforming him from traitor to tragic hero. His portrait was eventually hung in the headmaster's office, and his story served as a bitter reminder that even within the ranks of darkness there were shades of sacrifice. But Snape's case was unique. Others, like the Carrow siblings, Alecto and Amicus, were captured and sentenced to Azkaban. They had revelled in cruelty during the occupation of Hogwarts, and when the war ended, there was no mercy for them. Their capture marked one of the Ministry's early victories, a public demonstration that the days of impunity were gone. The case of Fenrir Greyback was different. Neither fully Death Eater nor independent, he had served Voldemort as a savage ally, turning his pack of werewolves against Muggleborns and children. After the battle, Greyback disappeared into the wilderness, hunted by both Aurors and his own kind. Rumours persisted that he lived deep in the Forbidden Forest or the mountains of Albania, still preying on the lost and the weak. No official record ever confirmed his capture. His name became a dark legend told to wizarding children, a living ghost of the war that refused to die. Some Death Eaters tried to blend back into ordinary life. Those who had claimed they were under the Imperious Curse during the First War used the same defense again. The Ministry, desperate to restore order, accepted some of these claims in exchange for cooperation. Families like the Yaxleys and the Knotts provided information that led to the capture of more dangerous fugitives. But their freedom came at the cost of eternal suspicion. At every public event, every social gathering, whispers followed them. He was one of them, people would murmur. He wore the mark. Even decades later, when their children entered Hogwarts, that mark lingered invisibly, a curse that no magic could remove. For Harry Potter, the question of what to do with the surviving Death Eaters was not just political, it was deeply personal. He had seen too much killing, too much vengeance, to believe that punishment alone could heal the world. Yet he also understood that forgiveness could not erase what they had done. "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are," Dumbledore had once told him. And now, faced with a world free of Voldemort but not free of hatred, those words weighed heavier than ever. Harry often attended the trials, sitting silently among the spectators, watching the faces of those who had once hunted him. Some showed defiance, others fear, and a few, an unmistakable few, showed shame. He could not hate them all, but neither could he forget. The trials themselves became a turning point in wizarding justice. Gone were the secret tribunals of the old ministry. Now proceedings were open to the public. It was there that Pius Thickness, the puppet minister installed by Voldemort, was sentenced to life in Azkaban. His defense, that he had been placed under the Imperious Curse, failed to convince the jury. The memory of the Muggle-born Registration Commission and the atrocities committed under his leadership was still too raw. His imprisonment became a symbol that no position of power could protect a servant of darkness forever. Not all the Death Eaters went quietly. Some organized resistance movements in the shadows, hoping to revive the ideals of the Dark Lord. In 2005, more than 7 years after the Battle of Hogwarts, a small group calling themselves the Children of the Serpent attacked a Muggle village near the Scottish border. They left behind graffiti bearing the faded image of the Dark Mark. The Auror Office, led by Harry and Hermione Granger, swiftly dismantled the group. Their leader, a former Slytherin named Corbin Mulciber Jr., confessed under Veritaserum that he had never even met Voldemort. "We just wanted to feel powerful again," he said before his sentencing. It was a chilling reminder that the spirit of the Death Eaters had not been completely extinguished, only scattered. Time, however, is a relentless eraser. As the years passed, the surviving Death Eaters grew older, their power waned, and the new generation of witches and wizards began to see them not as monsters, but as relics. The Dark Mark faded almost completely, though never entirely. Draco Malfoy once told a ministry historian that he could still see it faintly in the right light, a reminder of the night he had been branded against his will. "It will never leave me," he said quietly, "but I've learned to live with it." His words reflected a broader truth, that the scars of that war lived not only on the skin, but in the soul of wizarding Britain. Among the most tragic of the survivors was Rabastan Lestrange, brother of Rodolphus. He spent the remainder of his life in Azkaban, refusing to speak or show remorse. When he died in 2003, his last words, overheard by a guard, were said to be, "He will rise again." The phrase was dismissed as madness, but it fueled years of conspiracy theories among fringe followers who believed Voldemort's soul might still linger in some forgotten Horcrux. Though these rumors were never proven, they ensured that the legend of the Dark Lord remained alive in whispers and nightmares. The ministry eventually declared the war officially over, but peace was fragile. Entire departments were created to monitor dark artifacts, forbidden curses, and suspicious gatherings. Some of these operations were led by former members of Dumbledore's army who had once fought as students and now served as defenders of the New World. Luna Lovegood often spoke of the need for compassion, arguing that hatred only bred more hatred. Her voice, though soft, carried weight. "If we stop seeing them as monsters," she once said in a lecture at Hogwarts, "we might stop creating more of them." Yet not everyone could forgive. Families who had lost loved ones to Death Eaters found little solace in the Ministry's reforms. For them, justice felt incomplete. The ghosts of the fallen haunted the corridors of Hogwarts and the halls of the Ministry alike. Every year on the anniversary of the battle, candles were lit at the memorial by the lake, their light reflected in the water like the stars above, a reminder of the price of darkness and the fragile victory of light. In the end, the fate of the Death Eaters was as diverse as their reasons for following Voldemort. Some died defiant, others lived in shame. Some sought redemption, others disappeared into legend. The wizarding world moved forward, but the memory of the Dark Mark remained, faint yet unforgotten. It was not just a symbol of evil, but of choice, of how ordinary people, faced with fear, could lose themselves to the promise of power. And though Voldemort's body had turned to ash that night in the Great Hall, the question of the Death Eater's fate lingered, like the echo of a curse that refused to die. Number 20. Why did Voldemort assign Draco Malfoy such a crucial task? Voldemort's decision to entrust Draco Malfoy with the assassination of Albus Dumbledore remains one of the most disturbing and fascinating acts of manipulation in the entire Harry Potter saga. To many readers, it appears absurd that the Dark Lord, a master of control and fear, would give such a monumental task to a 16-year-old schoolboy. Yet behind this apparent madness lies a cruel logic, but a deliberate act of punishment, humiliation, and psychological warfare aimed not only at Draco but at the entire Malfoy family. Voldemort's mind was never guided by fairness. It was governed by dominance, vengeance, and the need to remind his followers that he alone held the power to grant or take away favor. From the very beginning, the Malfoys had stood as one of Voldemort's most prestigious families. Lucius Malfoy, wealthy, cunning, and influential, had always believed himself indispensable. But after the fiasco at the Department of Mysteries, where the prophecy was destroyed and his followers were captured, Voldemort's anger turned swiftly toward him. "Lucius," Voldemort had hissed in The Half-Blood Prince, "has been a great disappointment to me." The loss of the prophecy was not just a failure, it was a personal humiliation for the Dark Lord, who despised incompetence even more than betrayal. Lucius was disgraced, his position in Voldemort's inner circle shattered. The Malfoy mansion, once a place of privilege and influence, became a gilded cage of fear. It was in this context that Voldemort handed Draco his fatal mission: to kill Dumbledore. The task itself was absurdly disproportionate to Draco's abilities. Voldemort, the master of manipulation, knew perfectly well that Draco was not a killer. He knew that Dumbledore was perhaps the most powerful wizard alive, and that even his adult followers had failed to harm him. But Voldemort was not seeking success, he was seeking submission. By placing this impossible burden on Draco, he turned the boy into a symbol of his family's punishment. Lucius had failed, now his son would suffer the consequences. In Voldemort's twisted worldview, fear and despair were stronger tools than trust or loyalty. Draco's mission was also designed as a test. Voldemort wanted to see how far the Malfoys would go to regain their lost favor. Narcissa Malfoy's desperation was palpable from her very first appearance in The Half-Blood Prince. Her visit to Severus Snape's home, accompanied by the treacherous Bellatrix Lestrange, revealed the depth of her terror. She fell to her knees before Snape, crying, "He'll kill me! He'll kill my Draco!" These words capture the horror of a mother trapped in Voldemort's game. Narcissa knew that failure meant death, not only for her son, but for the entire family. Voldemort, in his cold calculation, had turned maternal love into a weapon. Draco, meanwhile, was sinking deeper into isolation. Hogwarts, once a stage for his arrogance, became a prison of expectations. Every corridor seemed to echo with the impossible command, "Kill Dumbledore." The boy who once mocked Harry Potter now lived in constant fear. His pale face, sleepless eyes, and trembling hands betrayed the truth that he could not confess to anyone. When Rowling describes him leaning over the vanishing cabinet in the Room of Requirement, desperately trying to repair it, readers can sense the tragic futility of his mission. He was working feverishly, the book says, his expression tense and strained. It was not ambition that drove him, but terror. Through Draco's suffering, Voldemort achieved something far more effective than punishment alone. He demonstrated to every Death Eater that even the purest blood and the oldest name offered no protection. The Malfoys, who once prided themselves on their closeness to power, were now examples of what happened when that power turned its gaze against them. This was psychological warfare of the highest order. In Voldemort's regime, mercy was weakness and fear was obedience. To make an example of a family as respected as the Malfoys sent a message sharper than any curse: the Dark Lord forgives nothing. Severus Snape's role in this drama deepened the cruelty of the entire scheme. When Narcissa begged him to protect Draco, he reluctantly agreed, sealing the unbreakable vow. "Will you, Severus, watch over my son, Draco, as he attempts to fulfill the Dark Lord's wishes?" she asked. And Snape, fully aware of the trap set by Voldemort, answered, "I will." This vow placed Snape at the crossroads between life and death, loyalty and deceit. Voldemort, cunning as ever, had managed to bind Snape's fate to that of the boy he was using as a pawn. If Draco failed, Snape would be forced to intervene, and in doing so, expose his true loyalties. The plan was diabolically perfect. Either Draco died trying, or Snape revealed himself. In both cases, Voldemort would win. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of this entire situation is that Voldemort never expected Dumbledore to fall by Draco's hand. He viewed Draco as expendable, a piece on a chessboard to be sacrificed for effect. Voldemort's hatred for Dumbledore was immense, but his need to humiliate his own followers was greater still. He would not risk his own life in an attack when he could prove his dominance through the suffering of others. As Bellatrix gleefully pointed out, Voldemort always rewards failure with pain. For the Malfoys, the reward was despair, degradation, and the slow destruction of their family's pride. When the fateful night came and Draco finally confronted Dumbledore atop the astronomy tower, the truth of Voldemort's manipulation became unbearable. Dumbledore, weakened and cornered, did not raise his wand. He simply looked at the boy with calm pity. "Draco," he said quietly, "you are not a killer." Those words shattered the illusion of strength that Draco had tried to maintain. In that moment, Voldemort's plan reached its emotional peak. A child trembling with a wand pointed at an old man, a family crushed under the weight of fear, and a teacher seeing the ruin of innocence. Voldemort had not only punished Lucius, he had corrupted his son's soul. Draco's hesitation at that moment reveals everything about Voldemort's failure to understand love, compassion, and conscience. The Dark Lord believed fear could replace faith, that pain could replace loyalty. But Draco's trembling hands betrayed the truth. The human heart cannot be entirely subdued by terror. When Snape appeared and cast the fatal spell, Avada Kedavra, the echo of that curse, marked not only Dumbledore's death, but also the death of Voldemort's illusion of control. For all his power, he could not turn Draco into a murderer. The boy had been broken, yes, but not remade in his image. The aftermath of the event further exposed Voldemort's strategy. When he returned to Malfoy Manor in the Deathly Hallows, the once proud family was reduced to fearful servants. Lucius sat pale and defeated, Narcissa silent, and Draco visibly shrinking from Voldemort's presence. Their home was no longer their own. It had become the Dark Lord's headquarters, a constant reminder that their power was gone. When Voldemort demanded Lucius's wand, there was no protest. "My lord," Lucius whispered, "take mine." The gesture symbolized total submission, the destruction of identity. Voldemort had succeeded in turning the Malfoys from allies into hostages. Through this act, Voldemort reshaped the hierarchy of his followers. The pure blood ideal, once celebrated among Death Eaters, was now meaningless. Power came not from lineage, but from usefulness to him. Bellatrix Lestrange rose in prominence precisely because her fanatic devotion replaced Lucius's calculating ambition. By contrast, Draco's failure and Narcissa's defiance in protecting her son during the Battle of Hogwarts revealed the ultimate weakness in Voldemort's rule. Love still had the power to resist him. When Narcissa lied to Voldemort, telling him that Harry was dead so she could find her son, she unknowingly dealt the first true wound to his empire. Her maternal love triumphed over fear, just as Voldemort's cruelty had once weaponized it. Draco's story, therefore, becomes more than a subplot. It is a mirror reflecting Voldemort's deepest flaws. His inability to comprehend empathy, compassion, or family bonds blinded him to their strength. He believed he was testing loyalty, but he was truly exposing his own ignorance. In trying to punish Lucius, he sowed the seeds of quiet rebellion within the very family that once worshipped him. The Malfoys' slow withdrawal from Voldemort's cause by the end of the war was the ultimate proof that terror breeds obedience, not devotion. Every decision Voldemort made regarding the Malfoys was rooted in his pathological obsession with control. To him, people were tools to be used, discarded, or destroyed. Giving Draco the impossible mission was not about achieving victory, it was about asserting dominance. He wanted the Death Eaters to see that even their children could be offered as sacrifices to his will. The sight of a trembling boy bearing the weight of an execution order was meant to terrify them into compliance. It was a message more effective than any public punishment. No one is safe from the Dark Lord's wrath. Yet Voldemort's miscalculation was fatal. He underestimated the resilience of the human spirit, the quiet defiance born from love and fear combined. Draco's failure did not weaken the Malfoys, it saved them. It forced Narcissa to act, Lucius to yield, and, ultimately, their family to step away from the abyss. In the end, Voldemort's cruelty achieved the opposite of what he intended. By turning Draco into a victim instead of a weapon, he exposed the moral emptiness of his rule. Through one boy's trembling hand, the reader witnesses the unraveling of tyranny built on fear. The story of Draco's impossible mission is therefore not about failure, but about revelation. It shows that even in a world dominated by darkness, the spark of humanity, love, fear, guilt, mercy, can survive. Voldemort's decision to use a child as an instrument of vengeance remains one of the most chilling examples of his cruelty, but it also stands as proof that his understanding of power was flawed. He could command obedience, but never the heart. In the end, Draco Malfoy's mission to kill Dumbledore became not an act of loyalty, but a testament to the human cost of evil, a lesson that Voldemort, in all his arrogance, would never learn. Number 21. Did Death Eaters have access to forbidden magic? The Death Eaters were not merely followers of a dark ideology, they were masters of the forbidden, practitioners of arts that most wizards dared not even whisper about. Within their ranks, knowledge was power, and the kind of knowledge they pursued was drawn from the deepest, most dangerous recesses of magical history. When Voldemort rose to power, he didn't just promise dominance, he promised revelation. He offered his followers access to the kind of magic the Ministry of Magic had sealed away centuries ago, the spells, rituals, and enchantments that blurred the line between life and death. It was this access that made the Death Eaters more than soldiers. It made them predators in a world of ordinary wizards. Among their most feared weapons were, of course, the unforgivable curses, the Cruciatus curse, which twisted nerves into threads of agony, the Imperious curse, which bent the human will like a twig, and the Killing curse, Avada Kedavra, a flash of green that ended existence in silence. As Bellatrix Lestrange once said with feverish delight, "You need to mean them, Potter. You need to really want to cause pain to enjoy it." This was not simply cruelty. It was an insight into how the Death Eaters used forbidden magic. These curses were not just tools. They were acts of transformation, rituals that bound their souls closer to the darkness they served. Every use of the unforgivable curses left an invisible scar, a mark of corruption that even magic could not cleanse. But their darkness went far beyond those 3 spells. Deep within the secret chambers of old manor houses, Death Eaters experimented with black alchemy, the creation of potions that could alter bloodlines, resurrect the dead in twisted forms, or extend life unnaturally. It was whispered that Voldemort's followers had attempted to recreate versions of the Philosopher's Stone, not for enlightenment, but for dominance. Where Nicholas Flamel sought eternal knowledge, they sought eternal control. The process was brutal and often fatal. Some who tried to imitate such alchemy were found lifeless, their bodies distorted, their blood thick with residue that shimmered with a faint green glow. Those who survived became something else, something less than human. Bellatrix Lestrange was among those who embraced such experiments most fervently. She was said to have performed blood rituals not merely as acts of cruelty, but as ways to channel and amplify dark power. The Ministry's records on captured Death Eaters included strange accounts, circles of bone dust, runes written in blood, and whispers of ritual pain, a method of focusing magical energy through suffering. Bellatrix believed that agony purified magic, that only through destruction could true strength be found. Those who saw her in battle described her as mad with joy, her spells crackling with unnatural intensity. She had mastered not just spell work, but the dark psychology that turned torment into fuel. Antonin Dolohov, by contrast, was a craftsman of combat spells, a duelist whose destructive magic rivaled even that of the Aurors who hunted him. The scar across Hermione Granger's chest in the Department of Mysteries was proof of the potency of his curse, one that had no name in any official spellbook. Dolohov's magic was said to draw from ancient battlefield rituals dating back to wizards who fought in the Goblin rebellions. His wand flicks were precise, his incantations often silent, suggesting that he used a form of magic closer to instinct than instruction. This silence made him all the more lethal, a man who had moved beyond the need for words, channeling raw will into death. Necromancy was another shadowed art that the Death Eaters touched, though few dared admit it even among their ranks. The reanimation of the dead was not a fantasy. It was an abomination that even the darkest textbooks forbade. Yet rumors persisted that Voldemort's followers had performed rites to bind the spirits of the slain, creating illusions or half-living servants. The inferi that filled the lake in the Horcrux cave were the culmination of such experiments, corpses animated by pure malice. "They are not truly alive," Dumbledore had once explained, "but they will not hesitate to kill." These were not creations of a single wizard. They were the collective achievement of Death Eater alchemy and necromantic collaboration, perfected under Voldemort's command. The link between Voldemort and his followers was not just ideological, but magical. The Dark Mark was more than a symbol. It was an enchanted bond, a living brand that pulsed when its master called. Its creation required blood and soul magic, the kind that bound one life to another through shared essence. To brand a Death Eater was to connect them to Voldemort's own life force, allowing him to summon them with a touch of thought. It was rumored that those who disobeyed or betrayed him felt their mark burn hotter than fire, searing the skin as punishment. The mark, in many ways, was a dark mirror of the Patronus. But where the Patronus drew on hope and light, the dark mark was born of fear and devotion to darkness. Some among the Death Eaters delved into transfiguration, so forbidden that even the animagus transformation seemed like child's play. Experiments on altering human flesh went beyond the limits of morality or safety. Peter Pettigrew's silver hand, given by Voldemort himself, was one such masterpiece of dark transmutation, infused with magic that could kill at a command. Yet such enchantments demanded terrible sacrifices. The metal was bound to Pettigrew's life force, and when his loyalty wavered, it turned against him, strangling him at the moment of hesitation. This was dark magic in its purest form, power with a price, obedience sealed by death. Even Severus Snape, who played both sides with a mind as sharp as his wand, carried the knowledge of such darkness. His own creations, spells like Sectum Sempra, bore the unmistakable mark of forbidden study. "For enemies," he had written beside it in his old potions textbook. Sectum Sempra was no ordinary curse. It sliced flesh as if the very air turned into blades. It was a reminder that dark knowledge once learned could never truly be forgotten, even when turned toward defense. Snape's dual life symbolized the truth about dark magic. It could be used for purpose, but never without cost. The Ministry of Magic tried desperately to contain this spreading corruption by banning entire categories of magical study. Books such as Secrets of the Darkest Art were locked in the restricted section of Hogwarts, yet copies still found their way into private collections. Some Death Eaters, especially those of old wizarding families, already possessed inherited grimoires filled with ancestral curses and rituals. The Malfoy library was rumoured to hold volumes bound in dragonhide, their pages written in runes that bled when touched. Such collections had been passed down for generations, their contents whispered about but rarely read aloud for fear of the consequences. It is impossible to speak of forbidden Death Eater magic without mentioning the Horcrux, the ultimate transgression against nature. While Voldemort alone created them, the theory and fragments of the ritual were known to a few close followers. Splitting one's soul was the pinnacle of dark magical achievement, the act of immortality through desecration. To confide in another wizard, as Professor Slughorn had once said, is a very great step indeed. That Voldemort did so at all meant that some of his Death Eaters must have been aware of, if not involved in, these acts of unholy creation. They served not merely a lord, but a being who had torn himself apart to become untouchable. Their understanding of ancient magic extended even to relics long thought mythical. The Death Eaters were fascinated by the Hallows, particularly the Elder Wand, which Voldemort came to claim as his own. To wield such an artifact required knowledge of wand lore far beyond modern study. Ollivander himself had admitted, the wand chooses the wizard, but in the hands of the Death Eaters it was the other way around. They bent the will of wands to serve their power. The combination of ancient relics and forbidden learning created a force that no ordinary spellbook could rival. The forbidden arts they wielded were not simply about destruction, they were about control over others, over death, over the laws of magic itself. In their eyes, morality was a limitation, not a virtue. They explored what the Ministry would not, what Dumbledore warned against, the temptation of absolute mastery. Each Death Eater became a living experiment in what happens when power replaces principle. Some were consumed by madness, others by ambition. Few survived unchanged. Bellatrix's insanity, Dolohov's silence, Pettigrew's servitude, all were symptoms of the same corruption. Their dark magic was a mirror held up to the wizarding world, revealing what lay beneath the polite veneer of light magic. For every spell that healed, they created one that harmed. For every charm of love, they devised one of obedience. They believed themselves to be pioneers, breaking the taboos that had kept magic pure but limited. The irony, of course, was that their search for transcendence only chained them tighter to their master, and to the darkness that ultimately devoured them. In the end, the Death Eaters' access to forbidden magic was not just their weapon, it was their undoing. The deeper they delved, the more their humanity eroded. They became fragments of the very spells they cast, hollow, powerful, and cursed. The world would remember their deeds not merely as acts of evil, but as warnings. For in every dark ritual and whispered incantation there was the echo of a single truth. Knowledge without mercy leads only to destruction. Number 22. Why did some Death Eaters return to Voldemort despite fear? When the dark mark burned upon their arms, many Death Eaters felt something beyond pain. It was a call, a whisper of power, an irresistible pull toward the one they had once served. To understand why some of them returned to Lord Voldemort even after years of terror and defeat, one must look beyond fear and obedience. Fear could make a man kneel, but it could not make him worship. What bound many Death Eaters to Voldemort was faith, twisted, fervent, and consuming. Bellatrix Lestrange was the most striking embodiment of this faith. Her devotion bordered on madness, yet it was sincere. When Voldemort vanished after that fateful night in Godric's Hollow, Bellatrix refused to believe he was gone. In the Order of the Phoenix, she screamed before her trial, "The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch. Throw us into Azkaban, we will wait." Her words were not those of fear, but of conviction. Azkaban, for her, was not a punishment, but a test of loyalty. Years later, when Voldemort did return, she was among the first to kneel before him, proud, trembling with awe, and unrepentant. For Bellatrix, Voldemort was more than a leader. He was a messiah who promised a new world where her blood, her lineage, her magic would finally be revered as divine. This belief in magical supremacy was not born with Voldemort, but found its perfect voice in him. Wizards like Lucius Malfoy, who moved among the elite of wizarding Britain, shared the conviction that Muggle-borns diluted the strength of the magical race. The Malfoys' manor itself was a shrine to this ideology. Cold marble floors, ancestral portraits, and whispers of a proud bloodline. When Voldemort first rose to power, Lucius saw in him not a tyrant but an opportunity, a man who could transform old prejudice into law. Even when the Dark Lord fell, Lucius maintained his mask of respectability, pretending remorse while clutching his wealth and status. But the moment Voldemort returned, Lucius's old arrogance resurfaced. His return was not out of terror, it was nostalgia for power. Voldemort's rise meant that the old order of purebloods would once again dominate, and Lucius could reclaim his place among the chosen. Others returned not from conviction but from emptiness. The fall of Voldemort left many Death Eaters adrift, stripped of identity. They had dedicated their lives to his cause, committed atrocities in his name, and built their reputations upon the shadow of his power. When that shadow vanished, so did their purpose. Consider Antonin Dolohov, once feared across Europe, later a fugitive hiding under false names. His return to Voldemort was not out of affection, but necessity. In a world that now despised Death Eaters, he saw no redemption, only the chance to regain the terror he had once inspired. For men like him, Voldemort was a dark mirror in which they saw their only reflection of worth. There were also those who returned because the alternative, a life of guilt and weakness, was unbearable. Walden McNair, executioner for the Ministry's Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, had tasted both worlds. He had lived under Voldemort's banner and later served the very government that once hunted him. Yet when the dark mark flared again, he did not hesitate. Voldemort's summons gave him purpose. He would rather live as a villain with a master than as a coward pretending to be redeemed. The Ministry could offer him employment, but only Voldemort could offer him belonging. Some, however, never truly left. Severus Snape's return was unlike any other. When Voldemort rose again, Snape came to him with lowered eyes and measured words, explaining that he had been acting as Dumbledore's spy to ensure his own survival. Voldemort believed him, or perhaps pretended to. Yet Snape's bond with the Dark Lord was more complicated than any oath of loyalty. He was once drawn to Voldemort's cause by fascination with power and the promise of recognition, but love, his love for Lily Potter, had broken that allegiance long before the Dark Lord's fall. When Snape returned, it was not to serve Voldemort, but to deceive him. And yet his return reflected a haunting truth. Once marked, one was never truly free. The Dark Mark was not merely an emblem, it was a brand that bound soul and flesh. The mark itself was one of Voldemort's greatest inventions, a symbol of control disguised as privilege. It burned upon his followers' arms, a living sigil that linked their minds to his. When Voldemort was weak, the mark faded. When he regained strength, it darkened and pulsed with heat. It was said that through this connection he could reach into their dreams. Igor Karkaroff's trembling fear in the goblet of fire revealed this terror. It burns, he is coming back. The mark was more than a tattoo, it was a tether of will. Some Death Eaters claimed they heard his voice whispering commands in their sleep. Others dreamed of serpents and saw visions of dark smoke. Whether these were real or imagined did not matter. The result was the same. The mark reminded them that Voldemort owned them body and mind. For some, that ownership was comforting. Take the case of Alecto and Amicus Carrow, siblings who thrived under Voldemort's reign. They were cruel, small-minded, and sadistic, yet they were insignificant in any normal world. Under Voldemort, however, they became teachers at Hogwarts, entrusted with punishing students and spreading ideology. When the Dark Lord summoned them, they came running, not because they feared him, but because he gave them meaning. They needed his authority to justify their cruelty. The mark on their skin was not a curse, but a badge of validation. Rodolphus Lestrange returned not only for power, but for vengeance. His years in Azkaban had broken his body, but not his hatred. He blamed the world for his suffering, the Ministry, Dumbledore's followers, even the complacent pure-bloods who denied the Dark Lord after his fall. When Voldemort's call reached him, Rodolphus saw it as justice. He would rise again, punish the traitors, and reclaim the pride of his family. The Lestranges were ancient, noble, and fanatical, a lineage that believed in destiny. For them, Voldemort's war was not evil, it was heritage. Others, like Peter Pettigrew, were bound by fear yet driven by something more desperate, the craving to belong. Pettigrew had spent years as a rat, hiding from both sides, consumed by guilt and loneliness. When he found Voldemort, he begged for forgiveness, not because he believed in the cause, but because he needed a master. "He would have killed me, Harry," he once stammered, "if I hadn't done it." Yet when he faced death at his master's command, even Pettigrew hesitated, his own hand strangling him in a brief act of mercy. His return was the saddest of all, proof that fear can enslave even the most cowardly soul, but never grant peace. There were whispers, too, of a mystical link between Voldemort and his followers, a bond not of loyalty but of essence. Some wizards claimed that the Dark Lord had learned ancient rituals that tied fragments of his soul to those who bore his mark. Perhaps this is why some Death Eaters, even after his defeat, felt phantom pain or lingering dreams of his presence. Magic that deep does not vanish with death. The connection was spiritual, parasitic, and intoxicating. When Voldemort rose again, that link reignited, and many felt it before the world even knew. The promise of immortality also lured them back. Voldemort's quest to conquer death was no secret among his inner circle. To those who feared mortality more than morality, his return offered hope. They believed he would one day share his secret, that he would lift them beyond human frailty. This illusion of eternal life was the cruelest of his manipulations. None of them gained immortality. Most died in agony, but the dream of transcending death was enough to keep them chained. Even after his final fall, the legacy of that devotion lingered. Some Death Eaters vanished into exile, still wearing long sleeves to hide the fading mark. Others raised their children in the old ideology, whispering stories of the Dark Lord as if he were a tragic hero betrayed by cowards. The ideology of pure-blood supremacy survived not because of Voldemort's victories, but because of the conviction he awakened, a belief that magic should rule over the ordinary, that power justified cruelty, that fear could be mistaken for reverence. It is easy to dismiss them as villains, but the truth is more complex. Many Death Eaters returned to Voldemort because he offered them what the world never could: identity, belonging, and purpose, however corrupted. Their loyalty was a mirror reflecting the darkest desires of human nature, the need to be part of something greater, even if that something devoured them in the end. Voldemort did not just command their wands, he commanded their souls, and for those souls the dark mark never truly faded. Number 23. Why didn't Voldemort trust even his most loyal followers? Voldemort trusted no one, not even those who had sworn eternal loyalty, those who bore the mark that burned upon their skin as a promise of obedience. His Death Eaters, the self-proclaimed elite of his dark army, believed themselves indispensable. Yet to the Dark Lord they were no more than chess pieces, each one expendable, each one dangerous in its own way. Voldemort's mind was a fortress of suspicion. Even at the height of his power, surrounded by kneeling followers, he stood alone, fearing the very people who would have died for him. His lack of trust was not merely paranoia. It was the scar of a life lived without love, without family, and without the warmth that might have taught him what loyalty truly meant. Tom Riddle grew up in an orphanage that offered nothing but cold meals and colder hearts. The matron saw in him a strange, unnerving boy who spoke little and smiled even less. He learned early that affection could not be trusted because it could be taken away. When he first discovered his magical abilities, he did not share them. He hoarded them like a secret weapon. Every cruel prank he played on the other children was a small test, a way to confirm that power brought safety and domination ensured survival. "I can make them hurt if I want to," he had once said to Dumbledore, his young eyes burning with pride. That boy never learned that real strength could come from compassion. For Tom Riddle, the world was a battlefield of deceit, and he was determined to be the only victor. When he became Lord Voldemort, that orphaned distrust matured into an art form. He demanded obedience but despised dependence. His followers were drawn by fear and awe, not by love. He would reward success with temporary favor, but his praise was poison, never sincere, always conditional. Lucius Malfoy was one of his most faithful lieutenants during the First War, yet Voldemort never saw him as a true ally. When Lucius failed to retrieve the prophecy in the Department of Mysteries, Voldemort's wrath was not the fury of a disappointed master. It was the cold satisfaction of a man proven right once again. "I do not forgive failures," he once hissed. In that moment, Lucius realized what every Death Eater would eventually understand. Voldemort's approval was a mirage, vanishing the moment it was needed most. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, whose devotion bordered on worship, was not spared from suspicion. Her love for her master was fierce, consuming, and utterly one-sided. She would have died for him without hesitation, yet Voldemort never returned even a fragment of her loyalty. Her adoration was useful, her madness even more so, but it was not enough to earn trust. When she fell to her knees before him, pleading to be allowed to fight Harry Potter in the final battle, Voldemort barely glanced at her. She was a tool, nothing more, and tools are meant to be used. "You are no match for him," he told her, dismissing her with the same indifference he would show to a broken wand. Bellatrix's faith in him was absolute, yet it was met with nothing but coldness. To Voldemort, love was weakness, and she, for all her cruelty, still possessed it. The one who came closest to breaking through his armor was Severus Snape. A man of contradictions, Snape lived a double life, serving two masters and betraying both in his own way. Voldemort valued his intelligence, his skill in the dark arts, and his seeming detachment from emotion. But even Snape, who played his role to perfection, could not escape the Dark Lord's doubt. "You do not seek to understand me, Severus," Voldemort once said, in a rare moment of candor. And he was right. Snape understood too much. Voldemort could sense the invisible thread that tied Snape's loyalty not to him, but to the memory of a woman long dead. Lily Potter's love for her son had left a mark on Snape's soul, and that mark was something Voldemort could never comprehend, let alone forgive. What truly terrified Voldemort was the possibility that someone could outthink him. His genius was both his weapon and his prison. Surrounded by Death Eaters, he saw not comrades but rivals, potential betrayers waiting for the moment to rise against him. His obsession with the prophecy, the words that spoke of his downfall, fed that paranoia. Every whisper, every hesitation, every glance exchanged between his followers became a sign of conspiracy. He divided them, ensuring that no true bond could form between them. He would pit one against another, offering small favors to some and punishments to others, always keeping them unbalanced. In that chaos, only his will mattered. But such control came at a price. The more he sought to command, the less he understood. The irony of Voldemort's reign was that he demanded loyalty without ever giving trust. His followers were trapped in a web of fear, terrified of both failure and success. Success drew envy and suspicion. Failure brought death. They became actors in a cruel theatre, wearing masks of devotion while hiding their terror. The night before the Battle of Hogwarts, as they waited in the dark forest, many of the Death Eaters trembled, not from courage, but from dread of their own master's wrath. They knew that if the battle turned against them, Voldemort would sacrifice them without hesitation. And he did. When he ordered Nagini to strike down Severus Snape, it was not revenge, it was calculation. Voldemort believed the Elder Wand would not obey him while its true master lived. Trust was replaced by superstition, friendship by cold logic. The result was betrayal cloaked in necessity. Riddle's inability to trust was rooted in his distorted view of human nature. He believed that love was a lie, loyalty a mask, and mercy a weakness. That belief became self-fulfilling. By seeing betrayal everywhere, he created the very treachery he feared. When the tide of war turned, his army crumbled from within. The Malfoys abandoned him, seeking safety for their family. Peter Pettigrew, the coward who once delivered the Potters to death, hesitated to kill Harry and paid with his life, a hesitation born of guilt, an emotion Voldemort thought extinct in his ranks. Even Bellatrix faltered for a moment when she saw her master fall, her scream of horror, not the cry of a warrior, but of a woman who had believed in something that was never real. There was perhaps a deeper irony at play. Voldemort built his empire on the promise of immortality, yet he never realized that trust is a form of survival. A leader without faith in his followers is already defeated. Dumbledore, the one man Voldemort truly feared, understood this well. You are protected, in short, by your ability to love, Dumbledore once told Harry. Voldemort had none of that protection. The Death Eaters feared his wrath, but none loved him, and so when he fell, there was no one left to stand for him, no one to mourn. His name, once whispered with awe, became a curse. The memory of the boy from the orphanage haunted the man he became. Tom Riddle had once been a lonely child searching for proof that he mattered. The discovery that he was a wizard filled him with joy, but it also confirmed his difference. He was not like others. He was better. That superiority grew into isolation, and isolation into mistrust. When he created his Horcruxes, he thought he was dividing his soul to ensure eternal life. In truth, he was dividing himself from humanity. Every fragment hidden away was another barrier between him and the capacity to believe in others. The Death Eaters served a master who was, in the deepest sense, already dead. When Voldemort returned to power after his first defeat, his paranoia intensified. He had been betrayed by Peter Pettigrew's cowardice, abandoned by those who claimed to worship him, and humiliated by his inability to destroy a baby. That humiliation festered into madness. He viewed every ally as a potential traitor, every act of loyalty as a trap. He spoke often of purity, of strength, but behind those words was only fear, the fear of being powerless again. Power became his substitute for trust. He demanded it, hoarded it, and yet it never satisfied him. The more he gained, the less secure he felt. During the Second Wizarding War, his mistrust became fatal. He underestimated the bond between Harry and his friends, a bond built on something he could never command. He mocked love, calling it a foolish sentiment, but it was love that defeated him. The Death Eaters fought because they were afraid to die. Harry fought because he was willing to. That difference, the willingness to sacrifice rather than control, was something Voldemort's heart could never comprehend. When he killed Snape for the Elder Wand, believing it would make him invincible, he only proved once more how little he understood the nature of loyalty. The wand's true master was not the one who killed, but the one who won allegiance freely given. In the end, Voldemort's inability to trust was his greatest weakness. His Death Eaters failed him not because they were disloyal, but because he made loyalty impossible. He demanded absolute obedience while offering nothing in return. He mistook fear for respect, silence for faith, and submission for devotion. When he stood alone in the Great Hall, surrounded by the bodies of his followers and the defiance of his enemies, he faced the truth he had always denied. Power without trust is hollow. He had conquered death for a time, but he had never conquered himself. Voldemort's tragedy was not simply that he was evil, it was that he could never imagine another way to live. Trust required vulnerability, and vulnerability was something Tom Riddle buried long ago in that orphanage hallway. The boy who wanted to be loved became the man who could only inspire terror. Every suspicion, every betrayal, every death he ordered was a shadow of that first betrayal he felt as a child abandoned. And so the circle closed. He created a world in his image, faithless, loveless, and doomed to collapse. The Death Eaters did not destroy him. He destroyed himself long before Harry Potter ever raised a wand. Number 24. What role did Death Eaters play in taking over the Ministry? When the Ministry of Magic fell, it was not with the roar of battle, but with the quiet, deliberate whisper of corruption. The Death Eaters, once operating in the shadows and feared for their open violence, had evolved into tacticians of political manipulation. They did not storm the doors of the Ministry with wands blazing. They crept in silently, their power spreading like a poisonous mist. The takeover was the perfect reflection of Lord Voldemort's philosophy: control the head, and the body will follow. And in this case, the head of the magical world was the Ministry itself. For years, the Death Eaters had learned from their failures. The chaos of the First Wizarding War taught them that brute force only roused resistance. This time, subtlety became their weapon. It began with infiltration. Pius Thicknessy, a man known for his bureaucratic obedience and lack of personal conviction, was an ideal pawn. Under the Imperious Curse, he became the false Minister for Magic, a puppet with no strings of his own. "The Ministry has fallen. Scrimgeour is dead. They are coming," said Kingsley Shacklebolt's Patronus, its calm yet urgent voice cutting through the chaos at Bill and Fleur's wedding. This chilling message marked the moment the magical government had shifted entirely into Voldemort's hands. Rufus Scrimgeour's assassination was the pivot point. A man of principle, but trapped in a bureaucratic web, Scrimgeour refused to betray Harry Potter's location even under torture. His death symbolized not only the fall of resistance within the Ministry, but also the victory of fear. His last moments were not on the battlefield, but in a hidden room surrounded by those who once served him. Voldemort understood that killing Scrimgeour quietly was far more powerful than killing him publicly. It created uncertainty. The wizarding population woke to the news that their government had changed hands without a single duel in the atrium. Within hours, the Death Eaters had replaced nearly every key figure. Under Thickness's name, new decrees began to circulate. The first to fall were those who could challenge the regime: members of the Wizengamot, senior Aurors, and heads of departments with long-standing loyalties to Dumbledore. Amelia Bones had been one of the strongest defenders of justice in the Ministry, but her assassination before the takeover sent a clear message: resistance would not be tolerated. What followed was a wave of silent dismissals and quiet threats. Some officials were placed under the Imperious Curse, others were blackmailed with the safety of their families. Those who resisted disappeared. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement became the Death Eaters' instrument of control. Once a symbol of justice, it was reshaped into a weapon of terror. The new head, Yaxley, a long-time Death Eater, restructured the Aura Office into a force of surveillance. Warrants were no longer issued based on evidence but on lineage. The Muggle-born Registration Commission was established, a grotesque parody of legal order. Its hearings were nothing more than public trials meant to humiliate and condemn. Dolores Umbridge, ever hungry for authority, presided over them with a saccharine smile. "You must understand," she told trembling Muggle-borns, "that you have stolen magic." Her words dripped with venom disguised as justice. Inside the Ministry, fear became the new law. Portraits whispered of disappearances, memos fluttered through hallways carrying false accusations. Even the lifts seemed to hum with unease. The Death Eaters had achieved what Voldemort could never do through violence: absolute obedience. Ordinary workers learned to lower their voices and avoid questions. The Death Eaters did not need to patrol every corridor. Suspicion and paranoia did the work for them. The once bustling Ministry became a grave of whispers, its golden statues replaced by the towering monument of a wizard crushing Muggles beneath his feet, a chilling symbol of the new order. In the Department of Mysteries, the Death Eaters sought what Voldemort prized most: knowledge. The Hall of Prophecy had already been damaged in the earlier battle, but the remaining unspeakables were forced into servitude, compelled to reveal the secrets of death and the Veil. Rookwood, a former unspeakable and now a Death Eater, oversaw this operation. The department became a laboratory for Voldemort's obsession with immortality and control. Every experiment, every document was now filtered through his ideology. Even knowledge was no longer free. It was owned, hoarded, and weaponized. Control of the media followed swiftly. The Daily Prophet, once cautious in its allegiance, turned into the Ministry's mouthpiece. Its headlines now screamed of the Muggle-born threat and the safety of pure-blood families. Those who dared to print the truth vanished. The voice of resistance survived only in secret through the Quibbler, where Xenophilius Lovegood risked everything to keep hope alive. But the average witch or wizard, reading their morning paper, saw only the narrative the Death Eaters wanted them to see. That order had been restored, that fear was safety, and that Harry Potter was the enemy. The Death Eaters' true genius lay in how they blended horror with normality. People still went to work, children still attended Hogwarts, but the world had changed in invisible ways. Teachers were replaced by spies, auras by enforcers, and every owl seemed to carry not just letters but potential betrayal. The Ministry's new decrees were designed to appear lawful. The Muggle-born Registration Act bore official seals and signatures, its language polished and bureaucratic. It was tyranny disguised as legality. The Death Eaters understood that the most terrifying regimes are those that make oppression feel like order. One of the most disturbing aspects of the takeover was how easily the magical population adapted. Fear had become a habit. When Harry, Hermione, and Ron later infiltrated the Ministry, they witnessed firsthand the atmosphere of dread that hung over its marble halls. "They're everywhere," Hermione whispered, as they passed rows of employees pretending not to see them. The trio's disguise could not hide the truth. This was not just Voldemort's victory, but the Ministry's surrender. The employees' silence was their complicity. Under the surface, however, not everyone accepted the new rule. Resistance brewed in small, hidden corners. Kingsley Shacklebolt and Arthur Weasley maintained secret networks within the Ministry, leaking information to the Order of the Phoenix. Files were smuggled out, safe houses prepared, and wands readied in quiet defiance. Yet even the bravest felt the suffocating grip of the regime. One whisper too loud could mean disappearance. The Death Eaters' mastery was psychological. They had turned loyalty into suspicion and courage into a crime. The most symbolic transformation came in the courtroom. Once a place of justice, it became a theatre of cruelty. Dementors hovered beside the judges' seats, their chilling presence breaking the spirit of those on trial. The accused were stripped of wands and dignity before being dragged to Azkaban, not for crimes committed, but for bloodlines inherited. The room that had once seen the trial of Bellatrix Lestrange now echoed with the cries of innocent witches and wizards. The Death Eaters had achieved their darkest triumph. Justice itself now spoke in their voice. Through the Ministry's control, Voldemort gained something he had never possessed before: legitimacy. The magical population no longer had to be conquered. It had been convinced. The new regime issued documents, taxes, and employment notices. It functioned like any government, only its purpose was not order, but obedience. This was no rebellion in the streets. It was the quiet rewriting of an entire society's moral code. The Death Eaters did not just occupy buildings, they occupied minds. Even after Voldemort's final defeat, the scars of that occupation lingered. The Ministry's marble floors were scrubbed clean, the propaganda destroyed, but the memory of fear could not be erased so easily. Many who had worked under the regime claimed ignorance, others guilt. It became clear that the Death Eaters had achieved something terrifyingly human. They had made evil seem ordinary. The takeover of the Ministry was not just a story of magic and power, but a mirror held up to every institution that believes itself immune to corruption. In the end, the Death Eaters' conquest of the Ministry of Magic stands as one of the most chilling chapters in wizarding history. It was a victory won not through open battle, but through manipulation, deceit, and psychological domination. Voldemort's followers had learned that the most effective way to enslave a population is not by breaking their wands, but by breaking their will. The fall of the Ministry was not a collapse. It was a surrender, quietly signed in ink and sealed with fear. Number 25. Do Death Eaters still exist after Voldemort's death? When the Battle of Hogwarts ended and Voldemort's body fell lifeless on the Great Hall floor, many believed that an era of darkness had come to its final breath. The world exhaled in relief, as if a spell of terror had been lifted from its chest. Yet history has always taught that evil does not vanish overnight. It seeps into the cracks of human fear, hides in silence, and waits for the right moment to rise again. The Death Eaters, once the most feared servants of the Dark Lord, were shattered but not entirely erased. Some were killed, some imprisoned, others claimed repentance. But a question lingers like a whisper in the night. Did they truly vanish, or did they simply learn to wear new faces? After the war, the Ministry of Magic, under the leadership of Kingsley Shacklebolt, hunted the remaining followers of Voldemort with uncompromising efficiency. Dozens were rounded up and sent to Azkaban, where their loyalty turned to ash under the Dementors' presence. But not all were caught. Some, like the Lestranges' distant cousins, or the lesser-known acolytes who never revealed their identities, disappeared into the fog of anonymity. The chaos of post-war reconstruction made it easy for a few to slip away. They cut their hair, changed their names, and vanished into small wizarding towns where no one asked questions. The scar had not pained Harry for 19 years, J.K. Rowling wrote, suggesting peace. But peace for Harry did not mean peace for the world he saved. There were rumours, quiet, persistent whispers, that in the years following Voldemort's fall, a few Death Eaters gathered in the ruins of old manors once belonging to pure-blood families. In Wiltshire, it was said that a light flickered once again in the abandoned Malfoy estate, though Lucius Malfoy himself had long withdrawn from the world. He had neither the strength nor the desire to lead anything resembling the old order. Yet there were those who still believed in the cause. They did not wear masks now, nor did they mark their arms with the dark mark. Instead, they traded in relics and secrets. Among them were men like Thorfinn Roll and Corbin Yaxley, who were last seen fleeing the battlefield. The ministry declared them missing, presumed dead, but no bodies were ever found. Years later, an Aura report quietly leaked to the Daily Prophet mentioned a strange incident near Nocturne Alley. A cursed locket bearing the serpent insignia of Salazar Slytherin was recovered during a raid on an illegal artifacts market. The ministry identified traces of a ritual spell inscribed inside, a rune sequence designed to preserve magical energy from a dead wizard. Though the report was buried, some believed it was an attempt to preserve a fragment of Voldemort's lingering power. Others whispered that it had nothing to do with Voldemort himself, but with those who still sought to carry his torch. The line between faith and obsession has always been thin among those who once called themselves Death Eaters. Consider Theodore Nott, the quiet Slytherin who, unlike Draco Malfoy, avoided the public eye after the war. His father, a known Death Eater, died in Azkaban. Theodore inherited not only the family home, but also his father's library, a collection of dark texts predating Grindelwald's rise. Years later, whispers in the corridors of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement hinted that Nott had been seen researching temporal magic, spells dealing with echoes of time and resurrection. One theory claims that he and a small circle of sympathizers tried to reconstruct a version of the Dark Mark, capable of summoning not a person, but an idea, a magical beacon to call together those who still shared Voldemort's ideology. Nothing was proven, but in a world where belief has power, even whispers can be dangerous. Others found new forms of influence. The Greengrass family, for example, was rumoured to have quietly funded certain historical preservation societies that collected pure blood relics. Officially, these groups focused on heritage. Unofficially, they might have been a meeting ground for families nostalgic for the old days when blood status defined worth. The Death Eaters had been crushed as an organization, but not as a mindset. It survived in the subtleties of dinner conversations, in the pages of forbidden books that escaped ministry censorship, and in the hearts of those who refused to let go of their superiority complex. Evil had learned to whisper instead of scream. The Wizarding World scars were not only physical. Hermione Granger, as the newly appointed Minister for Magic decades later, once said in an interview, "You can't kill an idea by defeating its leader." Her words proved prophetic. Long after Voldemort's demise, isolated incidents began to appear, disappearances of half-bloods in the countryside, the desecration of Muggle-born memorials, and strange symbols burned into stone walls resembling faded dark marks. The ministry dismissed most of these as pranks, but the older generation, those who had fought in the war, knew better. "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death," read the inscription on James and Lily Potter's tombstone. Yet in a cruel twist, it seemed death itself had not destroyed Voldemort's influence, it had merely transformed it. One particularly chilling account came from a retired Auror named Wilkie Tremlett, who claimed to have encountered a masked figure during a raid on an illegal potion lab near the ruins of Godric's Hollow. The figure used a spell unknown to the modern registry, a curse that caused shadows to move independently of their owners. Tremlett later described the encounter as like fighting a ghost with a wand. When asked if he believed it was a surviving Death Eater, he answered only, "They're not gone." They're just waiting for someone to give them a reason. The Ministry never confirmed his statement, but his words echoed through the wizarding community. Some scholars, such as Bathilda Bagshot's descendants, argued that magic of Voldemort's scale leaves behind what they called residual consciousness. According to this theory, the Dark Lord's repeated use of Horcruxes and soul-splitting magic could have scattered fragments of his will across the world. If true, those fragments might attract the remnants of his followers, binding them in subtle, unseen ways. A faint burn under the skin where the dark mark once glowed could be enough to awaken dormant loyalty. After all, Voldemort once said, "There is no good and evil, there is only power, and those too weak to seek it." For some, that belief became a kind of religion. Meanwhile, Draco Malfoy's transformation became a symbol of what redemption looked like in a post-war world. He distanced himself from his father's ideology, raising his son Scorpius with values of tolerance and restraint. Yet even Draco admitted in private that he occasionally felt watched, as if unseen eyes followed him in the shadows of the manor. He once confided to an associate that he dreamed of a snake coiling around his arm again, whispering promises of peace through obedience. Whether that was guilt or something more supernatural, no one could tell. The line between memory and magic is thin for those who once bore the dark mark. In some corners of Eastern Europe, small covens were reportedly formed under the pretense of studying ancient wizarding traditions. One of them, the Children of the Serpent, allegedly operated out of the Carpathian Mountains. When Aurors investigated, they found altars bearing black candles and a single emblem carved into stone, a skull with a serpent emerging from its mouth. The same symbol that once terrified Britain had now become a totem of fascination for a new generation of dark wizards. These followers did not know Voldemort personally, but they worshipped the legend. In that sense, Voldemort had achieved something he never could in life: immortality through myth. Even within Hogwarts, subtle echoes remained. In the Room of Requirement, once a sanctuary for Dumbledore's army, house elves reported finding old books and parchments bearing strange ink patterns that shimmered when exposed to moonlight. They were traced to a student collective calling themselves the New Slytherins, who admired not Voldemort's cruelty, but his discipline and mastery over fear. Their leader, a brilliant but troubled student named Lysandra Burke, was expelled after she attempted to recreate a potion similar to Felix Felicis using basilisk venom. Her last known words before leaving the castle were, "He may be gone, but his wisdom still breathes." Those words unsettled many who remembered what had once happened under the banner of that so-called wisdom. Harry himself, though living a quiet life as head of the Auror office, could not ignore the signs. Reports of mysterious gatherings, of strange lights near abandoned manors, of magical disturbances resembling traces of dark rituals, all of it reminded him of the past he wished to forget. There were nights when he caught himself touching his scar, expecting it to burn. It never did. But the unease remained, an instinct honed by years of war. "The world isn't divided into good people and Death Eaters," Sirius Black once told him. Yet perhaps the truth was more haunting. The world always carries the potential for new Death Eaters, born not from blood, but from belief. In the end, the Death Eaters might no longer exist as an army, but their legacy endures like a stain on the soul of the wizarding world. They exist in every whisper of superiority, every prejudice disguised as tradition, every secret meeting where someone still mutters the name they dare not speak aloud. Voldemort is gone, but his ideology breathes quietly in the corners of fear and ambition. And perhaps that is the greatest danger of all, not that the dark mark will return to burn upon the sky, but that it never truly stopped glowing beneath the skin of those who once served him. Number 26. Who remained dangerous even without Voldemort. Antonin Dolohov was not the kind of man who needed a master to be terrifying. Even in the days when Voldemort had fallen and his followers scattered, Dolohov's name remained a whisper in dark alleys and aura offices. Known for his ruthless precision in combat, he had been one of the Death Eaters who fought not out of loyalty, but because he enjoyed the artistry of destruction. During the First Wizarding War, he was responsible for the deaths of Fabian and Gideon Prewett, two brothers so skilled that it took 5 Death Eaters to kill them. The scene must have been brutal, for as Moody once said, they fought like heroes. But Dolohov survived, and that was all that mattered to him. His dueling style was fast, almost theatrical in its elegance. No words, no wasted movements, only the hiss of a wand cutting the air and the sudden silence of his victims. Even after the fall of Voldemort, when the mark on his arm no longer burned, Dolohov did not stop. For men like him, the Dark Lord's command was not a mission. It was an excuse. Once Azkaban's walls failed to contain him, he returned to the only life he knew, the hunt. He roamed the wizarding world like a remnant of chaos, driven by hatred and habit. He did not need orders, he needed the thrill. When he appeared at the Department of Mysteries fighting Harry and his friends, his spell struck Hermione with a precision that froze time. "She's alive," Ron had cried, but barely. The curse was silent, invisible, yet it carried the weight of years of murderous refinement. That moment revealed why Dolohov was so feared. He had mastered not only the dark arts, but the emotionless focus required to use them effectively. Dolohov's cruelty was not blind rage, it was measured, calculated, even intellectual. He took pleasure in showing others how powerless they were. In a world where many Death Eaters sought Voldemort's approval like children craving a father's nod, Dolohov's independence made him doubly dangerous. He was not bound by ideology. When others spoke of blood purity, he smiled with indifference. He fought for the sake of fighting, killed because it proved something to himself, that he could still dominate, even in a world without a master. It was this autonomy that made him a lingering threat long after the Dark Lord's fall. He was a man who did not need a cause to continue the war. The Carrow siblings, Alecto and Amicus, represented a different kind of darkness. They were not as skilled as Dolohov, nor as strategic, but their cruelty filled Hogwarts with a horror that textbooks could never describe. When Voldemort seized control of the school, the Carrows were appointed as professors, turning education into punishment. Amicus taught defense against the dark arts, though the subject had long since twisted into an indoctrination of the dark arts themselves. Alecto, with her shrill voice and malicious glee, handled Muggle studies, teaching children that Muggles were beneath them. "They're like animals," she sneered in class, and she believed every word. These two siblings thrived. Not on power, but on submission. The sight of young faces breaking under fear was their favorite lesson. Their reign of terror inside Hogwarts was not about loyalty to Voldemort, it was about feeding an internal hunger. When the Carrows ordered students to use the Cruciatus curse on one another, they were not executing a military order. They were playing a game. They had discovered the intoxicating pleasure of absolute authority within closed walls. Even without the Dark Lord's presence, they ruled with impunity. Teachers like McGonagall despised them, yet were forced to obey, and that contrast gave the Carrows a twisted sense of triumph. The castle itself seemed to mourn, laughter faded, and the very walls echoed with cries instead of spells. Neville Longbottom, once clumsy and insecure, became the unwilling symbol of resistance against them. The Carrows tortured him repeatedly, trying to crush his spirit, but Neville's quiet endurance turned into open rebellion. "You didn't fight in the war, did you?" Amicus once sneered. But the irony was that their own cowardice showed in every act of cruelty. The Carrows only attacked when the victim was smaller, younger, weaker. That was their nature. Predators who thrived on fear, incapable of courage without the shadow of Voldemort behind them. Yet even after the Dark Lord's downfall, one could easily imagine them seeking another stage, another group to dominate. Their addiction was not to ideology but to humiliation itself. What made figures like Dolohov and the Carrows truly disturbing was how self-sufficient their evil had become. They no longer needed a command structure to perpetuate darkness. Voldemort had unleashed something that could not be recalled, individuals who found identity through destruction. The Dark Mark had served as a symbol once, unity under a single will, but when that unity shattered, it left fragments of wickedness scattered across the wizarding world. These remnants lived on, each Death Eater embodying a different face of corruption. Some, like Bellatrix Lestrange, sought to resurrect the cause. Others, like Dolohov, continued it out of habit. And the Carrows, they simply enjoyed the ruins. There is a strange fascination in how ordinary some of these monsters were before their descent. Alecto and Amicus were siblings who, by all accounts, had once been unremarkable purebloods, the sort who blended easily into wizarding society, but once given permission to be cruel, they flourished like weeds in the dark. Their sadism had been waiting for a cause to legitimize it. The structure of Voldemort's regime gave them not orders, but permission, the moral erasure that allowed them to indulge their impulses without consequence. Even after the war ended, their memories must have echoed with the laughter of terrified students. It was not ideology they missed, but the taste of control. Dolohov's story, on the other hand, speaks of something colder, the banality of war's veterans who cannot return to peace. For him, every duel was a way to relive the only part of himself that still functioned. He was a soldier without a war, a killer without a cause. When captured after the Battle of Hogwarts, he showed no remorse, no anger, only resignation. The world had changed and he had not. In that way, he embodied the purest form of Voldemort's legacy, a man so consumed by violence that even freedom meant nothing without conflict. He was not born evil, he had been refined by it, tempered like a blade forged in hatred. The danger of these independent Death Eaters lay in their adaptability. When the Dark Lord vanished, they did not crumble. They evolved. Some fled to distant countries, living as mercenaries or outlaws. Others blended into wizarding society, hiding behind false names and modest lives, waiting for an opportunity to rise again. Each carried within them a fragment of that dark ideology, ready to ignite if the world once more descended into chaos. "Evil doesn't die," Dumbledore once said, "it merely sleeps." In men like Dolohov and women like Alecto Carrow, evil never slept. It adapted, survived, thrived. Their danger also came from the psychological power they held over others. The Carrows understood that fear could achieve what curses could not. They used the threat of punishment to manipulate behavior, turning students against one another. It was a microcosm of Voldemort's regime, replicated within stone corridors. Dolohov, by contrast, controlled through presence alone. The sight of his wand was enough to unnerve even trained auras. His silence in battle was his greatest weapon. Where others shouted incantations, he killed without a word, proving mastery that bordered on artistry. The fear he inspired was not only in his victims, but in his peers who recognized in him a talent untethered by morality. These Death Eaters represented different shades of the same darkness. Dolohov was the craftsman of death, a man whose skill made him lethal regardless of cause. The Carrows were the opportunists, thriving where authority allowed cruelty. Together they demonstrated that the true danger of Voldemort's movement was not the man himself, but the permission he gave to monsters already among them. His fall did not destroy them, it liberated them. The world that followed the Second Wizarding War still had to deal with the debris of his ideology, wizards and witches who no longer needed a master to justify their sins. When Hogwarts was restored and peace declared, the scars they left were slow to fade. Students who had endured their classes carried invisible wounds. Some could no longer sleep without hearing Alecto's cackle or feeling Amicus's shadow. In that sense, their evil had outlived them. Dolohov's victims too left behind grieving families and unanswered questions. How could a man continue to kill for pleasure when his cause was gone? Perhaps, as Dumbledore once hinted, evil is not a philosophy but an addiction, one that grips the soul until nothing remains but habit. Dolohov, Alecto, and Amicus were not anomalies. They were the inevitable residue of a world that had allowed darkness to flourish unchecked. Even years later, their names still surface in conversations about the war, cautionary examples of what happens when power and cruelty find each other. Their stories remind the wizarding world that the true horror was never just Voldemort's reign, but the hearts that welcomed it. For every leader of darkness, there are always those who do not need orders to follow, those who, like Dolohov and the Carrows, will find a way to continue the work, even when the master is gone, and that is what made them, above all others, the most dangerous kind of Death Eaters. Number 29. Why did the Ministry ignore their return for so long? When the first whispers of Voldemort's return began to circulate through the wizarding world, the Ministry of Magic chose silence over truth. Cornelius Fudge, the minister at the time, preferred calm illusions to uncomfortable realities. He believed that acknowledging Voldemort's return would shatter the fragile peace that had lasted since the First Wizarding War. Yet, by denying it, the Ministry opened the door for the Death Eaters to operate unseen, to infiltrate, and to prepare for domination. Fear of instability became the very cause of the downfall they wished to avoid. The Ministry's fear was not only political, it was deeply personal. Fudge's authority depended on his image as a man who had restored order after chaos. To admit that the Dark Lord had risen again would mean confessing that this order was a lie. He was not ready for that. Dumbledore's warnings were treated not as guidance, but as threats to his power. The headmaster of Hogwarts became an inconvenient voice, one that challenged the comfort of denial. Fudge's paranoia turned Dumbledore from ally to adversary, and the Ministry's propaganda machine went to work, discrediting both him and Harry Potter. Harry became the face of hysteria. The Daily Prophet, acting in concert with the Ministry, called him confused, attention-seeking, even unstable. When he claimed, after the Triwizard Tournament, that Lord Voldemort had returned, Fudge's response was to accuse him of lying. "He's not back. He can't be," Fudge insisted. That statement was not simply disbelief, it was desperation. To the public, the denial looked like reason. To those who knew the truth, it was blindness by choice. The Ministry believed that if they silenced Harry, they could silence fear itself. Meanwhile, the Death Eaters did not waste time. They moved quietly through the cracks of bureaucracy and fear, contacting former allies, rebuilding networks, and ensuring that no one could trace their steps. Lucius Malfoy, always a master of manipulation, stood as a symbol of how deeply corruption ran. While pretending to support the ministry's policies, he financed Voldemort's return and used his wealth to influence the very officials who were supposed to protect the public. When Fudge looked at Lucius, he saw respectability. When Voldemort looked at him, he saw a loyal servant hiding in plain sight. The irony of the ministry's ignorance was cruel. While they were chasing false threats, raiding innocent homes and questioning harmless wizards, the true danger gathered strength under their very noses. The Death Eaters didn't need to fight open battles. They were already inside. Through fear and influence, they turned the system itself into a weapon. When Dolores Umbridge arrived at Hogwarts as the High Inquisitor, her purpose wasn't education, it was control. Her presence symbolized the ministry's attempt to extend its blindness to the next generation, ensuring that truth itself became forbidden knowledge. Harry and Dumbledore's army stood in direct defiance of this system. In the Room of Requirement, they trained in secret, not just to defend themselves, but to preserve the truth. "The ministry's interfering at Hogwarts," Hermione once said, her frustration echoing the fear that knowledge itself might be erased. The ministry believed that controlling education could prevent rebellion. What they didn't understand was that by suppressing truth, they made resistance inevitable. The young witches and wizards, taught to think critically and act bravely, became the very force that would later help topple the regime Fudge had allowed to fester. When Voldemort finally revealed himself at the Ministry during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, denial collapsed. "He's back!" Fudge cried, pale and shaking, seeing with his own eyes what he had spent 2 years refusing to believe. But by then the damage was irreversible. The Death Eaters had already re-established their power base, the Order of the Phoenix had suffered losses, and trust in the government was broken beyond repair. The Ministry's belated acknowledgement of reality came too late to matter. Behind this political blindness lay a deeper moral failure, the inability to face evil until it was unavoidable. In many ways, the Ministry reflected the society it ruled, comfortable, fearful, unwilling to remember the cost of ignorance. The wizarding world wanted peace so badly that it preferred a lie to a warning. Voldemort understood this perfectly. He thrived not on open warfare, but on silence, denial, and fear of speaking his name. Every time the Ministry refused to say Voldemort, they gave him more power, because fear unspoken becomes power unchallenged.